Today we have a very exciting webinar. We've got Bobby McGee, and he's going to be talking about creating magic in the off-season. My name is Melissa Schwartz, and I'm here facilitating the webinar. If you have questions for Bobby, feel free to enter them in the little question area, and I'm going to be looking at them throughout the webinar and collecting questions for Bobby to answer at the end. We are going to try to set aside about 5 or 10 minutes for questions. If we don't get to your question, we are going to put together a nice blog post and cover some of the FAQs that came in from everyone. TrainingPeaks with information on how to get a copy of the webinar and also how to get access to the presentation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bobby.
Hi, everybody. Always nice to spend time with my favorite endurance freak community and spend some time going over some stuff that's probably not as directly applicable as we would prefer to have it when one thinks about just the swim, bike, run, or just thinks about the training. And then, of course, if you live in a climate like I am in at the moment, sometimes the weather doesn't play ball either. But when creating this presentation, we got to a point where we thought that the visual nature of just speaking about drills that can help you running would be quite difficult to pull off. So we're just looking at some of the other points as well. So let's just start off.
Oh, just a second while I get this PowerPoint up and going.
All right, so sorry about that. So just looking at the kind of thing that you can do in the off season when one thinks about planning. One typically is looking at volumes and frequencies and intensities, and a lot of people's minds go to the classic model where you're just thinking of laying out how would I increase my volume, and in this particular case, what would be a progression rate that I can typically maintain. Can I increase ITU triathletes, where once you create that understanding for them that it's not about going fast or it's not about going hard in the easy months, but it's about being physiologically easy, then the mileages tend to drop because they're running for progressively longer periods of time, but they're going slower, so they don't build the mileage that they want. And so if you're watching that too closely in the beginning, it can be a little bit frustrating, but stick with that. The other thing is just how are you going to prepare to assess your progression? Recently had some interesting talks with swim coaches and bike coaches that assessing how your base is going is almost a dangerous process in the winter months, because you have to pull out of those easy aerobic base building workouts and then end up doing something that's a harder intensity just to see if it's working. And of course, when you're training for a half Ironman or an Ironman, that becomes really problematic because it messes with your development. In fact, it might even slow down or push your endurance efforts onto a plateau. So looking at how to assess that, looking at simple little things like the pace slowly but surely getting better at the same intensity, or moving the intensities that you could work at before down a couple of beats. So typically I find at altitude I'd have to have athletes run at a ceiling of 70% of their heart rate reserve. And by heart rate reserve, I simply mean just using their resting heart rate as an evening factor. And then throughout the course of the first 4 weeks of base training, trying to move that 70% ceiling down to a 60% ceiling, because a number of individuals are not able to do something as aerobically demanding as running at as low as 60% or even lower of their heart rate reserve. The other thing to look for is how much more important, whether notwithstanding and everything else notwithstanding, how much more important consistency is to intensity, especially in the base month. After a base period, and then only very slightly improving through 6 to 10 weeks of quality work. So really that consistency work, I myself went to an altitude training camp for the Atlanta Games and was only able to go out on very hilly, uneven terrain once a day for a run, and at the end of an 8-week period was able to run a personal PR for 10 kilometers without doing any speed work, any stride work, anything like that. So never underestimate your efforts at creating a consistent approach during the difficult months. The other one is patience. This is a good one for triathletes to really pay attention to, because if your swim stroke is okay, you can progress your swim pretty quickly. And similarly on the bike, athletes that are new to the sport find that their bike conditioning accelerates so much quicker than their run conditioning does. And then they tend to get a little impatient on the run, thinking that maybe it's just that they're not training hard enough, and then things come crashing down around them. So that's a rather important point to make at the start of a conversation like that. The other one is the point that I started off with, talking about progression, where the old rules of 10 to 15% per week don't really apply anymore now that we have these wonderful tools in TrainingPeaks and WKO Plus and so on. What we're trying to do is accelerate training in the safest possible way, and sometimes that doesn't mean training with a week with a rest day once a week. Perhaps that means only one long run every 2 weeks. Whatever the case might be, but we need to discover what the individual's progression is. A nice rule of thumb is what took you 7 days to complete when you were 25 years old might take you 9 days to complete as a 35-year-old, and might take you 14 days to complete as a 50 or a 60-year-old. So just look at your progression based on those details, rather than looking at your progression based on what some formulaic equation says. And remember, the purpose of creating base training is to create capacity to train at high intensity levels. And that's also a mistake I often see with the triathletes is that that need, because they run more seldom, that need to try and push on their pace a little bit. And there's so many anecdotes out of the running and triathlon world where a high-level triathlete goes for a long run with a high-level marathon runner or a high-level 10,000-meter runner, and the 10,000-meter runner is always shocked at the pace that the triathlete is trying to maintain in these longer runs. And it really is about preparing that connective tissue, preparing the bones, the structure, preparing the tissue to be able to deal with the quality work later on, especially in the triathlete's case where they never really need to do those massively prolonged run sessions, because they can get a lot of that central fitness, that cardiovascular fitness that they require, that lactate threshold training. They can get that from the bike and the swim, and they don't need to necessarily go and do these vast and leg-endangering workouts that runners would have to do. And then the last thing is base really provides a huge amount of confidence. I think that there's probably a very strong biofeedback connection that when you are doing lots and lots of volume and you're doing it very solidly and you're progressing at a very thorough rate, that your confidence builds, and when the first quality workouts do come around, you can feel straight away that you are going to be able to do that. All right, so the next thing we want to look at is the concept of getting stronger before you want to go longer. It's sometimes the case where we think, all right, we got to build these base miles, we want to go further, and then once we've completed a nice block of volume training, then we'll go into the gym and get ourselves stronger before we do the quality work. But we actually need a lot of this strengthening work done before we go out and do these long miles. very often we might not be at optimum body composition when we start these base miles, and so we're going out there carrying, a pound plus more than we should be carrying, and that's accelerating down into our legs, and we actually need to be quite strong to deal with the volume. So I like to view an individual starting with a base phase as first looking at what their bone structure is like, if they come from a swimming background or a cycling background, or they haven't run for a long time, or they haven't done any walking or something like that, that they really have to take care of their bone density first before they even start any kind of training, which might mean substantial walking or a little bit of lifting or gym work or standing around, so that those bones of the feet and the legs and the pelvis and the low back increase density. They mineralize a little bit and get a little bit stronger. And then the next one is our spidey suit, our connective tissue, just making sure that that connective tissue is able to withstand the multiple impacts, and doing a bit of work in that regard first, rope, so on, help to prepare that connective tissue, because running really is about stiffening your knees and stiffening your ankles and stiffening your back, whereas many of the other winter activities that we do are often about loosening and lengthening musculature, and we really have to work on getting that connective tissue prepared. And so the last one, and the one that responds the quickest, is the muscle. So if we do go out and we do a workout that's a little hard or a little long for us, and our muscles respond adversely, pretty much 48 hours to 5 days, they should be fine. So other than getting tears and so on involved, we just want to avoid that process. So looking at density, bone density, and then improving our elasticity, our springiness, and then working on our muscles' ability to sub-maximally contract and eccentrically contract for long periods of time. That becomes very important. So if you view it from a motor car standpoint, what we really want to look at is viewing the body as the base period, not so much as preparing the heart and the lungs, but as preparing the axles, all right, the legs and the feet, and preparing that chassis, which is the pelvis, the SI joint, and the low back. Those are the things that need to tighten up, as it were, but at the same time have those optimal ranges of motion to be able to deal with the repetitive motions, because the great danger for the endurance athlete is the overuse injury, and not the injury from explosive work, which is very often not required to that intensity. So also to remember that running is a plyometric move. When you're landing on your foot, you're stiffening that ankle, as I said, you're stiffening that knee, you're stiffening the hip and the pelvis, and that movement occurs and in the calf muscles is not strong enough. You need to have power. In other words, you need to have a little bit of a speed component. And so again, coming back to looking at things like drills that promote quicker motion and that promote a preparation and an ability to be able to be on that foot for a very short but powerful period of time. So something that works really, really well in this period of time is running hills, just doing a lot of hill running. It slows the pace down. It reduces the gravitational forces when you're going up, and that can often be even further maximized. It's not that difficult to go out for a 2+ hour hike very early on in your conditioning phase, but it is very challenging to go for a hilly run of 2+ hours very early in your conditioning phase. So never underestimate the value of those. All right. So when it comes to building a base, I think the first thing that we need to look at is there's a huge difference between easy and slow. And very often an athlete that gets himself or herself a good coach to start off with gets really frustrated because the coach won't let them run at paces that they believe they are capable of. But if you go back to the previous slides and what I've just said, we realize that effort is not what is required, but preparation of the lower limb is what is required. So an interesting factor to consider is that with elite marathon runners, their long runs are typically a minute 45 to 2 minutes plus slower than what their racing pace is. But if you look at the average marathon runner or the average triathlete, their long runs are very similar to the pace that they wish to race at. And so, you know, basically what's happening there is we're skipping a very important preparation process, and that's what can lead to being stuck on a plateau, but even worse than that, getting injured, because you're just going too fast and you're creating centrifugal forces while you are running that are just too hard for you to withstand and not giving you any benefit anyway. So again, to get back to that concept of 60% of your heart rate reserve, and just throwing in that resting heart rate is always very useful, because, you know, as endurance athletes, I'm sure you've all noticed that your heart rates are so much lower than the average community. So the average heart rate for an individual is 72 to 74 beats a minute, and you'll probably find yours, you know, anywhere between, you know, mid-30s up to mid-60s. Those are typical heart rates for fit individuals. So just taking your maximum heart rate, which you should take from some sort of current activity. I don't recommend using 220 minus your age. It tends to be very inaccurate for endurance athletes. So just trying to find where your maximum heart rate is when last you saw a nice high heart rate, and then even possibly looking at your lactate threshold and, you know, adding, say, 5% to that or 10% to that should give you an idea of what your maximum heart rate is. And then subtracting your resting heart rate off that and multiplying that by 0.60, and then adding your resting heart rate back onto that. And then just going out, and if you live at altitude or you live in hilly terrain, or your conditioning isn't where it needs to be, or maybe your iron stores or on work on addressing those factors, and watch as your fitness increases that you are able to go out and run at those lower heart rates. So typically you're looking at the elites managing quite comfortably 55, 54, 53% of their maximum heart rate reserve of that 60%. So again, that number not difficult to determine. Now, as I said previously, with the runners versus the triathletes, obviously the triathletes have not got as many opportunities to run. They also don't need as many opportunities to run. The runners have to use running exclusively to condition their cardiovascular system, their heart, their lungs, their O2 delivery systems, whereas the triathletes have the pool as a wonderfully safe environment to develop that, as well as the bike to develop that. And so, you know, just slow it down. There's no rush to build the pace. Just build the volume and build the running motion. As I said earlier too, I mean, up is a whole lot better than down. A really nice early season test is to pick a nice long hill that takes you 20 plus minutes to run to the top, and just work your way up there as easily as you can. Look at what your velocity is. Look at what kind of heart rate you sustained over that distance. And then as the weeks and months go by in your base phases, keep going back to that hill climb and seeing how you improve in going up that hill. And it has so few few disadvantages running up a hill, and it takes away that need to go fast, because the hill will pretty much stop that from happening. And then the last one, and this is one of my all-time favorites, and I'm always promoting this, is the whole concept of the run walk. Fractionalizing. That's why interval training was created in the 30s and the 40s, was for people to run at race pace for longer distances than the race distance itself. And in a very similar fashion, breaking up those longer runs into a run-walk method, and I use this with the pros all the time. They're able to achieve very, very high mileages very, very quickly without undue impact to their legs and so on. Something definitely worth looking into. Generally, I settle down eventually to a 9 minutes running, 1 minute walking interval. But, if you wanting to run 8:30 pace or something for a marathon, that interval that Jeff Galloway has determined works quite well with just 6 minutes of running, 1 minute of walking. And when you're coming back from injury or coming back from illness, a really good way to approach this and to get back to your running much, much quicker is just a 1 minute run, 1 minute walk approach. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, is mess around with the size of your mesocycle. it's common for us to think, do our long stuff, our long rides and our long runs on weekends when we have the time. But then sometimes we tend to go a little hard in those long runs because we don't have time to do a longer tempo run. Just consider looking at a 2-week cycle instead, and then the 1 week you might do a tempo run, and the next weekend you might go out and do a long run, and that will be more than sufficient. And if you're watching your development, whether you're doing that in TrainingPeaks or mesocycle, you don't feel so rushed. I have a number of athletes where I go 2 days on, and then the next day would be a walk, and then the day after that would be an easy run again, and then another 2 build days. So that's just 2. All right, this is a big title: strides, pickups, straightaways, striders, acceleration runs, all the same thing. All right, it's going to running at a slightly faster pace than what the majority of your running is, and it's something that I find again in the triathlon community is avoided. I think people think it's maybe too fast. It's maybe something that can lead to injuries. So of course there is that component that you might be stronger than you think you are, and you might be running too fast. So make sure that you progress if you haven't been using strides, that you take your time getting up to the speed that you can maintain, so that you're taking care of that soft tissue, those ligaments and those tendons. All right, and then make sure somebody has a look at your mechanics as well, so that you are somebody that is able to sprint. I heard of an interesting little anecdote that Chrissy Wellington and Andy Potts were doing a shoot for Tier, and they asked Andy Potts to sprint, and Andy looks pretty magnificent when he sprints. And so they take some of those high-speed action photographs for their commercials. And then the photographer asked Chrissy to do the same, and then he said, no, let's try something else. Chrissy's such an endurance animal, but not looking fantastic when she sprints. So maybe just making sure that you have the form and that kind of ability, and especially those of you that have to wear pretty structured shoes to be able to run. All right, sometimes those shoes are a little heavy and a little too structured for running fast, so you might need a lighter pair of shoes when you look at using strides. Interestingly enough, in your base period is to look at the value of keeping your strides alactic. In other words, don't produce lactate when you're striding, and I know that sounds almost impossible, but make sure your recovery is complete, that you probably take a slow walk back for the distance that you did your stride before you do your next one. I typically start out with athletes with about 4 strides and then build their way up to a maximum of 8. And while I'm about that, just go to my final point there is looking at doing some strides towards the end of your long run. A lot of top athletes report feeling so much better in terms of their recovery from that long run, and able to get back to training so much sooner after that long run, just doing it in the last 10 minutes or so of your long run, doing those strides. And don't be afraid to throw in some walks after those strides to recover fully. When it comes to the progression, I think that the first thing to look at is most of us probably don't need to do strides on the flat, unless we are really quick individuals and we rely on that in a final sprint, and probably do these strides on a slight incline. Something around about 3 to 5% incline is just a safer way to do these strides. All right. What that does for us is it creates speed capacity through increasing our range of motion. So if you're utilizing, say, 90% of your range of motion to run at your race pace, you're pretty much near capacity from a mechanical standpoint. But if you've been doing some sprinting, you've been doing some striding, and your range of motion has now moved up to a point where your race pace is only encompassing 60 or 70% of your maximum range of motion, then you are much more economical. Striding is nothing other than really functional power work, plyometric work. Your legs have to work super hard to stay in alignment, and there's a lot of power involved as you're generating a lot more force. All right, and then the other beautiful thing about striding is once you start running at a pace that's significantly faster than your race paces, you're much smoother, much more coordinated, you're much more neuromuscularly conditioned to be able to manage those easier paces that represent what your aerobic ability is. Another point that comes up when we're doing strides and maybe a little further than that, a little later in the season, doing work up to about 30 seconds at these paces, is it stimulates the K pump, which is the potassium pump, is our ability to refurbish potassium ions relative to sodium ions for muscle contraction, for maximal muscle contraction. It improves that, which is something that obviously a 400 and an 800 meter runner would use a lot. But what we find with the endurance athlete is if your K pump is functioning optimally, you are using less oxygen to run at whatever your race pace is. So let's say you're a 7 or an 8 minute miler, you're now able to still run that 7 and that 8 minute mile, but sustain it for much longer periods of time because you are using less oxygen to sustain that pace. All right. So now let's just get into impaired in the colder weather. So you really don't want to be running fast. I remember being down at the Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista and coming out in the morning with the triathletes and training at 8 o'clock, and it's beautiful weather out there. It's 55 degrees. Everybody's having a blast, going really, really fast. And the sprinters are sitting on the bleachers, and they've got triple hoodies on, and they're listening to music, and they've got gloves on and 2 pairs of tights, and they won't move until the temperature gets into the mid-70s. All right, and that's because it just requires so much more muscle warmth to be able to run at these faster paces. So that's an important one right there. The second one is your physiology is suppressed. You don't have as much neural feedback from your peripherals. You feel clunky. You all know what it's like to get out of cold water in a triathlon and to run up the beach or run onto those concrete carpeted walkways. It really feels like it's shocking right throughout your body. It's because the cold has suppressed your proprioception. So when you go out and run in really cold weather and you run hard, you really run the risk of injuring yourself without even knowing it. So that's important too. You lose your feel, you lose your coordination, you're a little clunky. Obviously, you've got a ton of clothing on, so your range of motion is limited. All of those things are things that we need to be aware of. So even if you do have a wonderful parking garage, it still has a very hard surface. Those surfaces can be up to 5 times harder than they are in the summer. Concrete is 5 times harder than summer asphalt, but winter asphalt tends to freeze up and can be almost as hard as concrete. So that's something to remember as well. And then it's quite easy to get an overuse injury because if you're running on terrain that might have black ice on it, one tends to run a little tentatively, run a little tight. It's not difficult to do a hamstring or an Achilles tendon or something in those kind of surfaces. And then remember, your shoes after a while don't function as well when you're out in that kind of weather because the midsoles of your shoes freeze and they lose cushioning capacity. So that's something to remember as well. And they also don't flex as well as they normally would under normal conditions. So those are also important things to take care of. So let's have a look at these running drills. It sounds like such an odd thing because just as I said earlier with the sprinters, running drills are really, really hard to do in cold weather. So what are the running drills we could work on and why would they be beneficial? And just to allude to the previous point, I think something to look at is trying to do these drills on an indoor basketball court or a racquetball court or something like that. All of these things will allow you to do those in more sensible temperatures. I don't think going out and doing a full drill session with rest and recovery in between when it's 20 degrees outside is advisable no matter how much clothing you have on. All right, so the first thing to work on is your stride rate. So you can really work not as direct as it is when we start to lose strength. And, once you're 26, 27 years old, you start losing power. You start losing muscle mass. And a good way to maintain that and to stop that from accelerating is to work on your stride rate. And there's a number of drills that don't require a large range of motion, but which you can work on quite significantly improving your stride rate. The other one is preparing your peripherals. Obviously, doing drills in a good environment is a really good way to increase that bone density and to prepare that connective tissue. It's a fantastic way to do that without having the central conditioning system as a limiter. So you can go out and do, 20 meters, 25 yards of drills up and down, and you can cover, 3 miles during that workout, but it's not a cardiovascularly challenging workout. It's doing exactly what you want, which is preparing your legs to be able to do the longer distances once you've completed the bike ride. All right, so you're preparing yourself to withstand fatigue, so you can create these smaller motions repeatedly, all right, which build muscle endurance. And by doing so, you can also improve your speed capabilities, because you're, again, creating that larger range of motion template on which you only have to imprint a slower speed, making it so much more comfortable. So looking at drills like dynamic warm-ups and then the running drills themselves. So the dynamic warm-ups serve probably for most people as a significantly useful introductory range of drills, just doing those dynamic warm-ups, just loosening up the hamstrings, the glutes, the low back, the abs, the quads, especially the upper quads, the calf muscles, and the feet through a range of activities that are very much more functional than just doing passive stretching or even just active stretching. All right, and then the running drills, trying to make them as specific as possible to your limiters. If you have some issues with how you carry your arms or the alignment of your arms when you're running during your running gait, or your foot placement or your extension, to say swimming drills. Swimming drills are designed to teach you specific skills. Running drills, I want you to think about them more as trying to restore you to the great 16-year-old runner that you were once upon a time. And apologies to anybody who's 16 and younger and listening to me at the moment. The other thing is for you to maintain rhythm. Especially athletes that come to the sport, say, from a swimming background or maybe even from a cycling background, running rhythm is not natural. They tend to make it a strength activity. They tend to have a rhythm that is too slow. And just like a swimmer who's not a natural swimmer cannot afford to be away from the water for too long because they will lose their form, they will lose their rhythm, so too newer runners, non-lifetime runners who come to the sport will find great benefit in doing drills without fatigue that help them maintain the coordination, the balance, and the rhythm that they require. Next point is, again, to look at the fact that you need to be strong before you can do the power stuff, and running is a power move. Running is almost more of a power move than swimming and cycling. Well, not almost, it definitely is. All right, and so in order to be able to bear those very quick, high-intensity loads, a high-performance triathlete who's trying to run at optimal speed needs to be able to load their legs, each leg at a time, 3.2 to 3.5 times their body weight has to go through that leg 90 plus times a minute for 30 minutes. So it's a pretty intense activity. So if you think like a biomechanist in terms of the load that your leg needs to bear when you're running, a half marathon or a marathon, then that will guide you in terms of how you do these activities. A famous story is Sebastian Coe, world 800-meter record holder and Olympic 800-meter champion as well. No, Olympic 1500-meter champion, actually, double 1500-meter champion. Learning, doing leg extensions, partial leg extensions, doing 800 or 900 leg extensions at a time on each leg. All right, so he's in the gym in a long time doing just one activity, just thinking of it that way. So consider, running drills as a way to bulletproof your run, both from an injury prevention perspective and an efficiency perspective, helping you to maintain the best running form that you are capable of. Have a larger degree of athleticism and a larger capability of maintaining good running form. All right, so let's look at some key drills and we'll spend some time on these. So dynamic warm-ups that I would recommend for everybody are the heel walks. Now, key with the heel walks, basically a heel walk would be done in running shoes. I would off the ground. That would be a very important way to do that. Another salient point there is to flex your knee as you transition. So as you get to the back of your stride, flex your knee in order to get your foot forward again. All right, that's important. And then stand in front of a mirror the first time you do that. You'll notice that as you lift up your toes, if your calf muscles, your soleus muscles in particular, are tight, you will tend to stick your butt out. So try and get your butt forward without pinching your glutes, and make sure that you're in a nice straight line when you're walking forward. And again, just 3 times 20 meters is all you require. And in time, you'll see that you'll be able to do this more athletically and more soft. Try and keep your arms bent at your sides and walk rhythmically. All right. For those of you that stick your tongues out, I completely understand that. As you concentrate, it often shows up in your face. All right. The butt flicks that I recommend as a dynamic warm-up drill for most people are walking butt flicks. And so what you can do with the walking butt flicks is, again, make sure that your chest is down on the front. Don't arch your low back when you pick that heel up towards your butt. And when you're using it as a dynamic warm-up drill, you actually want to point your toe. So it's important that as you go down, just point your toe down towards the ground, flick your heel up at the back. Try and make it a very quick movement, and also try and keep your knee under your hip as opposed to bringing it up in the front like you would do if it was a running drill. So in a running drill, you would do completely the opposite. You would obviously toe up. In other words, you would dorsiflex your foot rather than plantar flex it. So plantar flexion, knee below you for loosening up. All right. And then if you're doing it as a dynamic warm-up, I would suggest walking. And again, look in a mirror when you do this. Use your back muscles as little as possible. Don't anteriorly rotate your pelvis. In other words, don't tilt your pelvis to the front in order to get your heel up, because then you're trying to use your back muscles. Try and use your hamstring muscles, keeping the front of your chest down when you do these heel walks. When you do these butt flicks. When you do transition to butt flicks as a running drill, try and do it every second step as opposed to every step. It's very demanding eccentrically on your hamstrings when you do it every step, and then progress to every step. The ninjas are hamstring kickouts, and this is a good contralateral move, and it helps prevent a lot of injuries, this drill. But again, just start off with it quite conservatively. And what you want to do is you want to kick up your right leg and then reach across with a crunch movement with your left arm, and either touch your shin or your shoelaces or your toe. All right. Don't force yourself to have to touch your toe if that's not possible for you. And you definitely do not have to have the leg on the ground or the leg in the air being straight. You can keep that knee slightly flexed. All right. I suggest pushing the opposite arm out behind you so that you have a bit of a contralateral balance move going on, and then try and do that rhythmically from one foot to the other. Another suggestion here is not for you to skip forward on the support leg. Leave that support leg behind you, because that's a very nice dynamic way to loosen up your hip flexors. All right, so you're trying to get this split movement, this dynamic split movement going up. But you needn't get your leg up much higher than parallel, then rather just crunch your upper body down to that leg. All right, it's a nice way in the winter, like we see on the bike, to remind you that we're trying to get rid of our excess adipose tissue in our stomach. All right, because our thigh will kick against our stomach if we do that crunch properly. And then the last one is a very good one. Other than people that have a bit of hip impingement, if you tend to get hip impingements, then this is not such a good activity, but it is the leg swing. All right. So this is the linear leg swing. All right. So it's not across the front of your body, but it's from front to back. So I suggest standing up against some support with the side of the leg that you want to be swinging. So if you're going to swing your right leg, hold on to a fence or something with your right leg. Start very conservatively by lifting your foot out in front of you, and then a little bit more powerfully swinging it out behind you. Again, just like with the heel walks and so on, and with the butt flicks, try to stabilize your pelvis. So you want to feel the sensation in the front of your hip. You don't want to feel it in your low back. So you want to imagine your pelvis as a bucket of water, and then when you swing your leg back, you don't want to be pouring water out of the front of that bucket. So stabilize yourself. And if you find that your pelvis is hypermobile and tends to tilt forward, then simply hold on to your hip with your opposite arm to your support arm and only push the leg backwards. In other words, fire the glute and push the leg backwards like you're trying to push a bucket or something behind you away with the sole of your foot. That will be sufficient to start with. And then over time, you can get a little bit more assertive with that movement. All right, so when it comes to the drills, I really like skipping, and skipping has so many variations. Obviously, there's the A skip, the B skip, and the C skip. You know, and those advanced skips with the higher knee lift and the quicker kick down are not necessarily. A skip is a nice little plyometric motion, staying close to the ground, trying to get a nice quick rhythm going. I always tell people that I'm teaching drills to imagine that they're going to be skipping for 26 miles. So they make it a real economical, springy, short stride, light, quick foot, you know, tap on the ground. So it's really something that you want to be going forward with a bounce rather than a push. So when you skip, it's just a little forefoot tightening of the ankle and bouncing off that ankle. Keep the arms bent, and some of you will notice that you have to think your way through this. You know, that's a contrived skip, and you were deprived of being able to skip across the park when you were a child. So just give it some time. It's a reflex action, and you'll learn how to skip again. Then looking into lateral skips, which are not really skips, but you're just standing in a slightly crouched position, all right, and you're just moving your feet laterally sideways. So you're just going as fast as you can eventually from right to left, and then from left to right again, just moving your feet away from you and then just following that with the other foot again. And there's quite a lot of nice video footage that you can go look at for lateral skips, and when we do publish the article in the blog form, I'll put on some URLs there so that you guys can go look at that. And then the karaoke drill, which there's a lot of conflict about whether this is the right word to use, whether it really is spelled that way, because there's also a South American, I think a Brazilian dance that's spelled with a C that's very different. Stairway to Heaven or something like that. But the karaoke drill, again, it's like a lateral skip, but this time you step across the front of your support leg, and then you step behind your support leg. So it's across the front, across the back, twisting your upper body to match that motion in an opposite direction. So quite a high skill movement. Football players, soccer players, a lot of team sports use this. It's a high coordination drill, and you can walk it in the beginning as a warm-up, and then later on just use very short, quick steps if you want to use it as a drill. The quick feet drill is basically a tiny little quick springy running motion where you're putting your forefoot down on the ground and rolling your heel close to the ground, keeping your legs kind of stiff. So just a really, really quick movement, but not a stuck. Very good drill. The next drill is a Velcro drill. I'll also send you a URL to go and have a look at that. But a Velcro drill is basically running with your arms stuck to your sides and feeling the natural connection of your shoulders and your hips to your knees and your feet. And then once you get that rhythm going, just loosening your arms, and it's a drill to remind you how little arm action you need for most endurance running, and also put your arms nicely on plane. So that's a really good drill that I find I use very, very often, especially with athletes that tend to run with that super low arm carriage and do a lot of work on their cores to be able to maintain their linear motion. A great running drill, and it's a strength and conditioning drill as well to do in the degrees roughly at your sides with your chest down as powerfully as you can. It's that eccentric motion of stopping the weight in the front and the back and then changing direction and going the other way around, you know, doing groups of, say, you know, anywhere between 10 and 30 seconds worth of work till you feel your entire core, your transverse abs, your rectus spinae, all the musculature of your chest and your spinal support muscles in your abdomen and hips will be working when you do these. It really teaches one to use that gyroscopic effect of the arms to good use. Any of the hip mobility drills, the ones I'm most partial to are hurdle drills, where you just put hurdles down, 5 or 6 hurdles down in front of you, or any of the devices you can get at your local gym, and you're just walking over these with heel over first, or pulling the foot over the side. All right, just walk hurdle, and then turning sideways and crouching under the second hurdle, and then standing up again and walking over the next hurdle, and so on. Those are very, very good mobility drills to use. And then the last, in endurance circles, sometimes plyometrics is a dirty word because it definitely has components to it that are very high risk, but gradually introduced with on one leg for 10 or 15 times, and then hopping on the other leg, or jumping off a small height like an old Reebok step, just jumping off that with both feet, landing at the bottom, and immediately jumping onto another step in front of you. So just a down-up movement. Maybe putting down a yoga block or two, and then standing with your left little plyometric drills. A great runner's plyometric drill is the runner's step up. So you step up onto a step in front of your left leg or in front of your right leg, and then the opposite leg you pull up and out, and you come up onto your toe, and then step back down again off that step. So just like a running motion that you do over there. All right, so that should give you some ideas of what you can work on in your off season, which for most athletes is really not an off season. It's those that have been unable to recover from the Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's phase that dislike the fact that they put themselves at -20 as opposed to starting the season at 0. These drills will help you start the season off with a great advantage and be able to load up on the quality training and the volume training as you go forward. So I'll be happy to get some questions from you guys, and if you want a lot more detail on this, you feel free to look into my Run Transformation course, which is about 10 hours of coach education and athlete education on mental skills training, running drills, the dynamic warm-ups are all on there, as well as run training ideas and so on. And if you sign up for that Run Transformation course in the next 48 hours, you'll get access to 18 of my run plans on TrainingPeaks, which are 5K up to the half marathon distance. Those are available. You'll get a month of TrainingPeaks premium membership to go with that, and those of you that already have membership will also be able to just add that on. So you're getting one free month, get 15% off with Boulder Running Company on a coupon code, and then you'll also get a free endurance films DVD that I've done called Triathlon the Run, which goes through the biomechanics of the run, as well as another free endurance video called Rides, the Florida series, which is a very nice way to go through stuff in the winter when you don't have the ability to be down in Florida and go out there. And then also finally 50% off on the 5 series set of USA Triathlon, which has Mark Allen, myself, Louis Vargas, Bob Seeberhaar, Andy Potts, and Mike Doan, with a nice little section on cycling from Tom Sheepers as well. So I'll be very happy to field some questions from you guys right now, and it was great to have spent some time with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Bobby. So we got a handful of good questions that came in. So we'll see how many we have time for. The first one is, for someone coming from a swimming or cycling focused background, how long should they expect the bone density or connective tissue adjustments to take?
That's a very good question, and I won't be able to give you a directly scientific answer. We do know that with any kind of loading that there's an immediate effect, but it will very much depend on your age. It will depend on your gender. It will depend on your bone density going in. We do know that collegiate swimmers that spend an inordinate amount of time in a low gravity environment have bone density levels as much as 85% lower than average individuals. It very much depends on, cyclists are not nearly in the same boat as swimmers that spend an extensive amount of time in the water. So if you're swimming once a day and you're swimming 5 times a week, and you're pretty much doing your shopping and you're walking and that kind of thing, I don't think that you have as big a problem as somebody who's spending a lot of time in that kind of low gravity environment. In fact, those swimmers, those collegiate swimmers, tend to have bone density decreases in alignment with what the astronauts experience when they spend extended periods of time at the space stations. So, again, age is important, gender is important, history of bone density is important, and then, so it's just how quickly do you periodize your return to impact sports like running, which is important. There are a number of ways in which they can measure bone density. The one that we use most is a DEXA scan, which will tell you where the bone density is low. Last year I was working with an elite triathlete who had the scan done, and interestingly enough, the bone density was fine everywhere except in her arms. And she was a very good swimmer, but obviously not doing enough impact work with her arms, and so bone density in her arms was pretty low, which becomes a threat when you fall off your bicycle or something like that. So just be aware of that as well. But yes, there are ways to measure that, and I highly recommend that athletes 40 years and older, especially females, have that checked out on a regular basis.
All right, thanks. Next question is, how often does someone do drills? At what point during the workout should the drills be done?
So in training, whether that's cycling or swimming or running, the best bang for your buck is to go longer and longer in a single session. That's why some of these marathon training programs that have heavy run training on the weekends and very little during the week are so successful. But when it comes to skills training, exactly the opposite is true. So when you want to develop skills, frequency is important. It's important that you're fresh when you do these drills. And as I said, it's very important to do them as often as possible. So rather than doing drills for an hour twice a week, you're much better off doing 10 minutes of drills 5-6 times a week. That will give you the most bang for your buck.
Thanks. When you were talking about different drills, you mentioned A skip, B skip, C skip. Is there a way you can describe that without actually being able to show us?
It's very difficult, but again, I'll put some URLs in there. So an A skip is an extended skip. In other words, instead of lifting the knee quite low in the front, you pick the knee up to hip height or even higher, and then you accelerate the foot down to the ground. So it's a slow up, quick down skip with a large range of motion. The B skip is even greater range of motion. The B skip is the same as the A skip, but just before you start the downward process, you extend the leg and pull it down underneath you. So instead of shooting it straight down, you extend the heel away from you, you straighten the knee, and then you accelerate it downwards. And then there's some different definitions out there, but that's the one I use.
Thanks. I didn't even know there was different types of skips, so it's definitely very informative. The last question I have is, do you have any specific drills that help with people who are having pain in their IT bands? I know that seems to be a more common question that triathletes or issue that triathletes face.
A drill for an IT band I'm not sure if there's a specific drill that you would do for an IT band. I still think the best way to approach IT band work is having really strong, stable hips and having really strong, stable knees, and then the old bugbear that everybody dislikes initially, and then we're all sick puppies anyway, this endurance community, and then it's just progressing to the hardest foam roller you can find with the most amount of weight you can put on that. And then we also have some really good success using dry needling or sport acupuncture techniques in that IT band. But the big thing with an IT band, don't let it happen, because IT band, Achilles tendonitis, those are hard ones, plantar fasciitis, those are hard ones to shake. So rather just get used to the fact that if you tend to ride with very low revs on the bike and you have a low cadence when you run, and you're a heel striker who tends to bend their knees a lot during mid-stance, that IT band is something that you're going to have to be working towards avoiding for pretty much all of your training time.
Okay, we actually have one more question.
Oh, okay.
Do you ever suggest yoga or Pilates to your runners or triathletes to assist in elasticity? If so, how often?
You know, flexibility versus mobility versus elasticity, that's such an interesting, complex question. So I'm a huge fan of yoga, and I'm just as big a fan of Pilates. I just feel that you need a very clued up therapist or teacher when you do this, so that you do not, if you tend to have lax ligaments and tendons, that you don't force the hip out of the joint a little bit. That can happen. Similar with the knee, similar with the ankle, because really as a runner you want quite stiff feet and ankles, you want quite a stiff knee and quite a stiff hip. So I do have some friends that have developed Pilates and yoga activities that are runner triathlete friendly, because they shouldn't actually be able to get into these very, very advanced positions. So, you know, just as a little thing on top of that, I'm not a huge fan of any of the yoga moves that tend to open up the hips too much, like the pigeon, unless there's a tremendous amount of counteractive pressure. So if you do the pigeon or something like that, is make sure that you're pushing down hard against the ground so that hip is not becoming unstable. Because just like with passive stretching, yoga done without holding yourself together nicely can destabilize your hips and your ankles. And so that's the only caveat that I have there, but I think they're wonderful activities, and their advantages far outweigh their disadvantages, and there are no disadvantages if you have a clued up instructor or teacher.
Great, thank you. So that wraps it up for this webinar with Bobby McGee. Thank you so much for coming into the office and doing this with us. Just a couple of reminders. We will be sending out an email to everyone who registered and everyone who attended. We'll let you know how you can watch this again and how you can get access to the presentations. And we'll also let you know once we have a new blog post out there kind of summarizing this webinar. And Bobby will include some of the URLs that he spoke about. I also want to remind you guys that our next webinar coming up is this Thursday, in fact, and it is with British Cycling, and it's about psychology of cycling coaches. So we've done one with British Cycling in the past. They're a great partner of us, and it's sure to be some really good information. And you can get information on that or our other webinars coming up by just going to our TrainingPeaks.com, click on the blog, and you can subscribe to our updated blog posts there. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a great day.